Nom Nom delivers fresh food with whole ingredients backed by veterinarian science. Science tells us that a dog's health starts in the bowl, so improving their diet is one of the best ways to help them live a long and happy life. Nom Nom's food is full of proteins your dog loves and the vitamins and nutrients they need to thrive. All you have to do is order, pour, and serve. Ready to make the switch to fresh? Order Nom Nom today. Go to https://trynom.com/curveball and get 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's https://trynom.com/curveball. Plus, Nom Nom comes with a money-back guarantee. If your dog's tail isn't wagging within 30 days, Nom Nom will refund your first order. No fillers, no nonsense, just Nom Nom. Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by executive career coach, speaker, author, consultant, and facilitator, Manisha Dhawans. Manisha is passionate about developing effective and inclusive leaders and teams. She has a book called The Digital Agile Leader, so we're going to be talking to her about everything that she's up to and her strategy for developing inclusive leaders and teams. So Manisha, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Curtis. My pleasure to be here.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I'm based in San Diego, grew up here. I love what I do. I've had a very challenging journey of ups and downs, twists and turns, as many of us have. I actually started my first experience in the workforce by watching my father, who's an entrepreneur, build a company from the ground up in our garage. My parents were immigrants from India. And when they arrived in San Diego, my mom decided to be a full-time homemaker, and my dad really had a passion, a mission, a vision. And he decided to build his own business, which was very risky at the time. You know, we were not in the best financial position, but he really believed so much in the technology. And so what he does is manufacture systems to purify water for different applications. And water is a very resilient industry. Everyone needs good, clean water. But I learned so much from him. He's still one of my biggest mentors today. And throughout high school, I worked in the family business. No job is too big or small, everything from packing boxes to doing administrative work. And later on, I returned back into the family business after graduating from college. And this time helped in a much, much bigger way. So I'd love to dive in and share all the lessons I've learned and some of the challenges I've encountered as I made some career pivots and went outside the family business to see what else I could do.
That was my next question. So go ahead and share.
Okay, great. So, I think at an early age and even sometimes in later years, we're kind of always reinventing and resetting and trying to take a step back and figure out what is it that we want to do? What do I want to do? How do I want to make an impact? And at the time, it was really just, I need to collect a paycheck and I've got some financial responsibilities. So again, working in the family business, this time I was working in sales and operations and marketing. I was just trying to get my hands on everything and learn the ins and outs. I was very fortunate to be in an environment where I was safe to explore and try out new projects. And I think that's the inclusivity piece we were talking about earlier, is how do you include different generations, people from different backgrounds, and involve them in parts of the business that maybe they would not necessarily have exposure to, and really see what they can do. So oftentimes we have hidden talents and skills that unless they're put to the test, we don't always know what they are. So I had that privilege and good fortune. But then after a while, I said, you know what else could be there for me? And my father was the first person to encourage me and said, go out there, try something new. I got my MBA from UC Irvine and then found myself in the world of management consulting, where I was on the plane every single week, Monday through Thursday, like clockwork, wake up, roll my suitcase to the airport and travel wherever the client was. So I joined Deloitte and PwC Consulting. And at the time, my clients were all over the country. And you're just thrown into different projects. So again, I had to be very resourceful and adaptable. Things were always changing, whether the flights were changing or the client changes their mind. I had to just kind of be very nimble. And so I was, for example, one of the first things I had to do was join a large scale technology project. And I'll never forget my boss at the time. It was a very high stress project. Stakes were high, multi-million-dollar project where anything can go wrong. And usually on these kinds of projects, there are things that can go wrong. And my boss actually had a stroke at the client site. She was under so much stress and she kind of burned herself out. And it was really, really an important lesson for me to watch because I was prone to that too. And I really wanted to dive in and do good work. But I had to check myself because my health was also suffering in the process of wanting to be a good leader and, just do a good job. So when the lead partner approached me and said, you are now going to take over this project, I was very skeptical and hesitant. I don't know if I even wanted the role, to be honest, considering what had transpired just a few weeks ago. But I decided to just seize the opportunity. And it was a rough few years. But in that time, I learned a ton. We were able to launch the project successfully, but I was trying to minimize the amount of negative impact on the team. So I learned it was super important to just build community, learn to trust your people, create a culture of trust. I had to tap into everybody's skill sets and really understand how am I going to leverage the team to the best of their abilities. What can each person do really well? How do I make them shine? Because I can certainly not do this all on my own. So we had a heart-to-heart as a team. I was now managing a friend of mine. So we had to have some conversations around what that dynamic was going to look like, how things were going to change. But all in all, through the course of it, we found a way to come together and to be cohesive. Were there hiccups? Sure. I mean, there were times I remember when the clients were actually yelling and upset at us. And I had to then develop emotional intelligence, learn to manage my own reactions and my own emotions first, and then try to meet the client, empathize with them, understand their concerns, and really just try to be align with them and partner with them and let them know that we're trying to make this successful. We've got some shared goals here. So fast forward, many consulting projects. I stayed in consulting for over a decade, went to a bunch of clients in the healthcare industry, technology, kind of across the spectrum, which was great. It's definitely stretched me and pulled me outside my comfort zone. And I ended up taking a full-time offer at one of my clients. It was Taco Bell headquarters, which was kind of a fun place to work for a while. And no, we do not get free tacos. We did not at the time. So at Taco Bell, I was thrown on a team and we had to innovate and prototype and scale their digital footprint across 7,000 restaurants. Again, met with so many more challenges. You've got 98% franchise-owned restaurants. You have to go get their buy-in to make any changes in their restaurants, work with outside vendors and partners, work internally, and try to make momentum on these projects that had been stagnant for a while. And the biggest lessons I learned there again were it was so important for me to foster cross-functional relationships, also learn the work and build credibility with the teams. I dove in, I got my hands in the work and really just try to understand what we were doing. So not shying away from the challenge and trying to face it head on. And then also making sure I was taking care of myself and the team in the process. So that being said, Curtis, here we are today. That was 2019. So I left that job. I think I tend to leave when I start to feel stagnant. I'm not growing. I'm kind of feeling like stuck in an organization, or I'm not getting support from my managers and leaders, and I have my own career development goals. So I pick up the phone when somebody calls, have the conversation, and I pivoted once again. I pivoted to recruiting and staffing. But ultimately, where I am today is I decided, given all my experience, I wanted to make a difference in a new way, kind of from the outside in. So I started my own practice where I'm doing the executive coaching, the career coaching, organizational development, consulting. And believe it or not, come full circle, as life often does, I'm back in the family business and supporting as well.
So what are some of the tips and advice that you learned from good leaders and not so good leaders?
Oof. And we definitely learn from both, right? And I'm going to be honest with you, in some of the places I've worked at, the environment got to a point where it was pretty challenging. I'm not going to name any places, but there was a lot of turnover. In some cases, I had a new boss every 6, 8, 9 months, which could be very jarring. So I had to learn how to also just be my own advocate in the workplace. Initially, I thought, I'm just going to put my head down, do good work, I'll get noticed. And ideally, that in a perfect world, maybe that would be the case. But with so many different things going on, I think it's important also to give leaders the benefit of the doubt that they're struggling and they're human like us. So they might miss the mark. They might have their own inherent biases or blind spots and make some mistakes. So in my time, what I saw kind of what I'll call is like the dark side of leadership, where it goes to extremes under a lot of stress and pressure, where you have to meet your numbers, and people might resort to egregious behaviors, or you start to question, the integrity of some of the decisions, and where things like ego take over, greed takes over, the desire for fame and accolades and achievements and titles can be all consuming. And depending on your personality, you can fall, any of us can fall prey to this kind of glorified, glamorized idea of what leadership could be. But to me, leadership is truly a responsibility. It's a privilege. It's an honor. It's something that I don't take lightly. There's a lot of stakeholders and people that you're impacting that have long-term ramifications on their families and their communities. So some of the best things I learned, and this was from my father too. And by the way, everyone has a different style and approach. So he can be very, very decisive. And, at the C-suite level, you're under a different kind of pressure. So I think it's okay to just want to make quick decisions and also make difficult decisions. So I had to think like a CEO and also step into their shoes and empathize with them. But I really learned that it's important to try to get different perspectives before just jumping to decisions and make a kind of a well-informed, data-driven decision. Sometimes we do have to go by our gut if things are moving very fast in today's age, and I talk about this in my book, that things are changing so quickly. The landscape is changing. Industries are transforming. There's a lot of new technology advances coming into the workspace. The way we're working, whether it's hybrid or remote or a combination of different types of workplace cultures, we have to be very adaptable and agile. And the leaders that do that well, I think they're just seeing around the corners. They're asking really, really good questions, and they are listening like there's no tomorrow. I mean, they're like continually listening, getting a pulse on the organization, looking at external market factors and things that are happening in the socioeconomic and political environment, and that's how that's reshaping, their decisions and their business. It's a team sport. I think you need to have a good leadership team as well, and know where your strengths are and where you might need to lean on others for that support. So learning from both the good and the bad, and sometimes leaders are pressure tested in some environments. Again, as humans, things can get the best of us and we can be reactive instead of proactive. Do you have mentors and people there to kind of check you and say, hey, I noticed that you're acting a little bit out of sorts. Maybe you need to, reevaluate this decision. How can we come together and collectively come up with a better solution? So, yeah, leaders have a lot on their plate. And that's one of the biggest things I hear from a lot of my clients and just people in my community, is that everyone's just kind of exhausted. There's just so much uncertainty and overwhelm. What's going to happen next? How do we pivot? How do we deal with this new challenge that's just suddenly landed on our plate? So we have to have compassion and grace and recognize it's a long-term play for sure.
So talk about your assessment tool, the Agility Matrix. Tell us about the purpose of it and what it does and why and how you decided to develop it.
Yeah, I love this question. So in my, when I was writing my book, a few things came to mind. Like I just started to notice there were themes for me, like change and navigating change and conflict, and a lot of the table stakes skills that I think we need to have as leaders and just employees, even in our personal lives, as just stewards, right? So when I was writing my book, interesting story, it's funny. My brother used to call me Moose as a nickname when we were growing up, just, for fun. And he joked with me and said, "You're writing a book. Are you serious? You got to put a moose in the book. You really need to put a moose in the book. That's the only way I'm going to read it." And, he was joking, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized maybe there's something to this. Maybe I can start to look at our behaviors and our characteristics and the way we show up and somehow embody them into these archetypes, which can be represented by animals. So I came up with the Agility Matrix, and essentially what it is it looks at how adaptable we are to change. It looks at how we approach conflict. Now, there's no good, bad, right or wrong way. It's just very situational. It's very context specific. So for example, Curtis, you might maybe be having a lot of stress on your plate or didn't sleep well the night before. So when you're engaging in conflict, you can tap into any of these archetypes or a blend of them. And then it's a snapshot in time. So down the road, maybe you pivot to a different phase. So I'll explain the 4 different animals, and maybe as I'm speaking, you can think about which ones resonate with you, maybe how you showed up as a blend of these animals or as specific ones, depending on what type of change or conflict you have encountered. In our personal lives, we can show very differently than in our work lives too, right? Okay, so we have the coyote. The coyote is one of the most adaptable creatures in the world. They've learned to thrive in different climates. So they embrace change. They like to lead the way. When it comes to conflict, they face it head on. And when it comes to change, they're kind of, pioneering change. They're very innovative, and they see change as opportunity. Now we've got, of course, the friendly moose, which I affectionately can relate to in many ways. So you think of the moose having these big antlers on their head, and I actually did read and study about these animals. Moose tend to get entangled. They can get stuck in trees, in other creatures and moose. And I think we can relate to this a lot when it comes to conflict and change. Maybe you're getting stuck somewhere and you're not quite sure how to proceed, or you keep hitting the same arguments or challenges over and over again, the obstacles that just keep coming in your path. So the moose is someone that they want to be a voice of change, but they're feeling a little bit stuck and they need support and resources and help. And then we've got the animal, the third animal is the ostrich. And as you can imagine, the ostrich, as we know, they don't actually really do this, but you got the ostrich, their head in the sand. They are just very overwhelmed. Maybe they don't want to look at the change that's happening around their life. For example, a relationship that's not serving them well, that's coming to an end, and they're holding on to this relationship because they're not ready to let go, and they're not ready to face the fact that life might look very different from them if they pivot and change. It could look better, but it's also very scary, that the fear of the unknown, the fear of what this change might bring. So the ostrich is not ready to face change. They ignore it, they avoid it. Same behavior when it comes to conflict. Let me just kind of avoid conflict. Conflict is very challenging. It can stir up a lot of emotions and maybe even prior trauma. So very relatable as well. And then lastly, the fourth animal archetype is the bear. The bear is very analytical, meticulous, thoughtful. When it comes to change, there's like, whoa, 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 slow down, coyote. We need to make sure we're changing for the right reasons. What's the impact on the people, on the processes? Are we sure that this makes sense for our organization or for our family or our team? Why are we doing this change? They're asking really good questions. And even when it comes to conflict, how can we come up with a solution and maybe not just try to, face it head on, but take a step back and evaluate, why is this happening? How do we need to approach conflict in a different manner? So in all my research and all my studies, and I'm continuing to collect data on this, but even through my past experiences, these are kind of the four archetypes that I identified throughout all my career changes, the different organizations I've worked for, and just by connecting with others. Generally speaking, these are the main responses to change and conflict. And that's what my assessment measures as well, the agility matrix.
And you give advice on job interviewing, and some advice on, career advice for people?
Yeah, and it's a very timely question, Curtis, because as you know, and as you've probably been hearing in the news, there's and it's cyclical. It happens in our economy where, we may see or hear, maybe the media is talking more about the layoffs. Companies are right sizing, maybe they overhired or they're downsizing and they're restructuring their teams. There's new strategic priorities, so they have to reevaluate the talent on the team and if they have the right skills in place. So as a result, what we're seeing is this is really impacting people and their employment and their job situation. Not to mention the introduction of things like, AI possibly coming for our jobs and the fear of what that's going to bring. But then, could we also, again, looking at this matrix, how are we approaching these types of changes? Is it from the lens of leaning into the change and trying to embrace it and learn and grow from it? Or are we kind of running away and letting the fears get the best of us? When it comes to job interviews, and a lot of my clients are, it's hard when you don't have somebody to practice with, to be that sounding board, to give you that feedback in the moment. And that's what I like to do is really help people adjust their responses and show up as their best selves for that role. So usually my advice, there's a few things. Definitely prepare lots and lots of practice. I know there's a lot of tools and resources available to help with that. Really, really know what the job is and what you're applying for, and thinking about some of the questions that you want to ask as well, because I believe it's a two-way street. You're also interviewing the company and trying to assess if it's a good fit for you and your skill sets. So not being afraid to ask those questions. I think again, I really recognizing what challenges is that specific company or industry facing. So the more you can do research and show up that you're adding value right out of the gate. You haven't even been offered the job, but you have some great insights, or you've been reading about the company. You're showing that you're really engaged and interested, and you really do care about their mission and their values. That can go a long way and leave a really, really good impression as well.
So tell the listeners about your book and what they can expect to read when they find it or when they decide to read it, and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. So the book is called The Digital Agile Leader. And, when I was first writing this book, I wasn't quite sure what it was going to look like. And the early stages look very different than the finished product. So I just want to say that, because for whoever is listening, when you're thinking about embarking on a project, whether it's writing a book or even an article or just doing something creative, I know for me, I got stuck a lot. I had to walk away from the book at moments where I started to get frustrated. But then there were other moments where I was so inspired and I got a download of a ton of ideas, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I just had to start writing. So the process was as much of a learning experience as the book itself. the book is a collection of stories and strategies that I've encountered along my career path. And it's a couple of things. One is, how do you show up as a better leader for yourself and for your teams, especially in a time of where things are changing quickly? So I outline 8 key principles of an effective leader in the digital age. Things like, making sure that you're listening to people and their stories and getting insights, shaping the culture by modeling the behaviors you want to see and really evaluating what behaviors are you rewarding and allowing. Other things include co-creating career paths with people. Are we really sitting down with our teams and understanding what they care about, giving them a voice and some ownership and onus to carve out their path, even if it's like a lateral move or just a project or some sort of training that they could take on. Because oftentimes in my experience, I felt like my managers didn't really give me a lot of advice or guidance on what a career path could look like. And I was kind of left in the dark trying to figure it out on my own. But I do think it could be a good partnership. I talk a lot about emotional intelligence, and in particular, sharing a story where, people lose their cool and they may have these visceral reactions, emotional reactions, and that's very normal. We go into survival mode and fight or flight or freeze mode. So it's counterintuitive to want to try to counter those natural responses, but it's a skill we can practice and we can hone. So things like that. I talk about all the skills I believe that leaders today and of the future are going to need. And then I talk about my experiences in terms of technology. So in a digital age, there's so many new tools coming out. I mean, if you just miss one day of the news, you've missed like at least 10 more pieces of technology that popped up, maybe more, all these startups coming into the forefront. So what can leaders do? They can be inundated with so much information. But I suggest taking a very strategic, thoughtful approach on how you want to implement technology, being discerning, not necessarily just jumping at whatever's the latest craze or the latest trend, staying informed, staying ahead of the curve, but recognizing that it's very, again, context specific. What problem are you trying to solve for your company, for your people? And it really goes back to the core of how we solve problems. In my book, I talk about thinking like a scientist, because I was actually a chemistry major in my college years. And despite the challenges I faced in learning science, I feel like it provided me a really good foundation of asking thoughtful questions, hypothesizing, testing and experimenting my hypotheses, trying to learn from that and iterate and get some insights. So these are the skills, again, I'm trying to show in my book, but in the form of stories and making it easy to digest. So people have a guidebook on how can they approach change and conflict and leadership in their lives. What if you're facing change in your own life? You've changed jobs, you've moved across the country, you've decided to take an early retirement, you've been hit by a global pandemic. These inevitable changes that can surface in our world and in our personal lives. I think it's really important to just take a step back and evaluate, how am I showing up? Is it helping me? Is it hurting me? Might there be another way for me to address or deal with conflict or change? And how can that benefit me or a relationship? I was super inspired to write this book because it was very much a healing process for me too, considering all the challenges I had gone through, working in, again, those very challenging and sometimes hostile environments. I was talking to people and I realized, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one that's experienced these hardships. And wouldn't it be great if I just put pen to paper and started writing? Of course, those thoughts come up, right? The comparison trap. Who am I to be a writer? There's so many books on leadership and belonging and inclusion and inclusivity today, and being agile. But I had to reframe that mindset and realize that no one else out there, and this applies to everyone listening too, no one else there has your stories and your perspectives and your voice. So I guarantee you, if you write a book or if you create something, yeah, there might be some, notes of something similar, but it's really your story to tell. And yeah, so I started writing this, and I rewrote it and rewrote it, and it took on so many different shapes. I scrapped away and started over in some cases. And it took me about a year to write everything and to edit it. But I also tell people that it took me a lifetime actually to accumulate the stories and the knowledge and the lessons and the mistakes and everything that I've had to do on my path.
But tell us about any upcoming or current projects that you're working on that people need to know about.
Ooh, yeah, projects. No shortage of projects. I think it's the consultant in me that tends to get the itch every time. And what am I going to work on next? And I have to remind myself, okay, slow down. It's important to celebrate the wins and to have fun along the way. And this was a big accomplishment. It was took so much time for me to write this book. So I did make sure to celebrate that moment and then revisit and figure out, okay, so now what? So a few projects I'm working on. The assessment is going to be, I'm going to go keep doing some analysis on that and hopefully be able to glean some really valuable insights that can inform people even further how we approach change and conflict. I'm hoping, it's interesting. You write one book, but it's true. When you write one book, you actually have enough material you've put aside or taken out that could shape into book number 2, book number 3. So I'm already thinking about my second and third book. I think a couple themes that come up for me are this idea of, again, it's kind of taking what I've already written, but expanding it further in terms of like pivoting your career and taking intentional steps in your career. And then another one is dedicated to people that are just trying to build their voice and their confidence and impact in the workplace. So I have a few ideas there with the next upcoming books. I'm also continuing to do speaking engagements, hopefully a TEDx in the future. That would be fun. And in terms of the family business, working at our company, Applied Membranes, it's really exciting to come back and relearn the business, and it's changed a lot. It's grown a lot. So I'm thinking about, how do I continue to up level the business and partner across generations? I mean, talk about inclusivity. We've got my father, he's still working there. My younger brother, who's 13 years younger, he's a millennial, I'm Gen X. And then, so it's a family business, but we're working across, different employees and different groups and different backgrounds. And in the age of water, there's still a lot of water scarcity, there's a lot of pollutants in the water, a lot of people don't have access to clean water. So how do we solve those really, really pressing challenges that are critical and vital to our survival and our growth and our future as a humanity? So that's very purposeful for me, as well as my passion projects, my creative projects, working with leaders to help them create more cohesive and collaborative teams, and also just be more effective leaders in their roles. So I kind of like to straddle both. I like to still be involved in the family business and have a pulse on what's actually going on. And that actually makes me a better effective coach to executives, because I'm not just talking the talk, I'm walking it with them. And I realize how hard it is to be a leader, especially today. And then lastly, I think just, again, focusing on, some of my personal life, spending more time with family. I'm very, very fortunate to have my family nearby, and I moved closer to them. And so I'm just excited to just continue improving and learning and showing up as best as I can.
But throw out your website so people can keep up with everything that you're up to.
Yeah, so you can reach me on my website is empathcoaching.com. That's M as in Mary, P as in Peter, ATH, empath. So it's empath without the letter E in the front. Empathcoaching.com is the website. And then Manisha Dhawans, you can find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. I'd love to continue the conversation. Instagram, empath coaching. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Always looking to connect.
Close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if there was something I forgot to touch on that you would like to talk about, or just any final thought you have for the listeners.
Yeah, I think leadership is very much a personal journey. Your career is a very unique path and journey. And kind of am owning and embracing that piece. And at some point, you're going to probably want to get to a space where you can mentor and advocate for others and support other people. It pays back in dividends tenfold. For me, the outlets I do that through are teaching at our local universities, being involved in veterans organizations, and again, just being a person in my community and in my family that people can count on or can reach out to. So I think it's just about believing in yourself, whatever path you choose. Not having to do it alone is super important. There were many times in my career, in my life, where I just did not ask for help. And I had a lot of pride, or I thought, hey, I've got this, I can handle it. And I had to hit a few rock bottom moments. I had to get some real hard reality checks where, no, I don't want to do it alone. I want to do it with others and for others. So as you're looking at what could be next for you, it's okay to be stuck at times. It's okay to not have all the answers and be unsure. I still hit those moments too in my business, or even, just every day I'm kind of thinking, what am I going to do today? How do I want to create my day? Just put one foot in front of the other, take a deep breath, and do what you can. Give yourself credit where credit is due.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Manisha Dhawans, please be sure to check her out. Pick up her book, check out everything she's up to. If you know of any business leaders that can benefit from everything she knows, be sure to follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. If you have any guests or suggestion topics, cjackson102@cox.net is the place to send them. As always, thank you for listening. And Manisha, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.